I've killed my colleagues' characters during RPG session, now they won't talk to me. I am a software developer and I've been with my current company for about 4 months now. Initially I've generally stuck to myself, but after a while, a month, of getting to know everybody, I've started spending most of my break time with a group of colleagues who share similar interests, mostly board and RPG games. To give some background as to how close we were, we generally ate lunch together, spent most of our extra break time chatting about random stuff etc. We also met once or twice after work to play board games and share a beer. The RPG session about 3 weeks ago they started talking about their RPG D&D session, which started before I joined the company, and since they saw that I was clearly interested, I was invited to join them. To my knowledge, the campaign was about 3 sessions in and I was one of the 3 new people who would be joining, for the total of 7 players. After about an hour spent creating our new characters, we started actually playing. After some generic role play and initial introduction, we were involved in a fight. Skipping the details, we won the fight, but most of the party was severely injured and 2 of the other 6 were actually unconscious. We were about to wrap up the session and get back to town, but I've stopped them because I was struck with a not-so-brilliant idea. Since my character was chaotic evil, like a really evil guy for those with no D&D background, I've decided that I will now try to take advantage of this opportune moment, and try to kill the remainder of the party for personal gain, since it was definitely something my character would do. After some initial confusion I started fighting the rest of my party, and once again, skipping the details, I've won, but only because I've been incredibly lucky with the dice. At this point I noticed while some of my friends were shocked, surprised by the situation, but still having fun, the rest was clearly disgusted, as what just happened meant creating new characters, starting new story etc. Consequences. Now, I understand if my colleagues didn't want to play RPG with me anymore, because they didn't consider what I did fun, acceptable, or they just plain didn't like it. However, I never expected them to almost completely exclude me from their group, and that's exactly what they did. The next couple of days the chat room we used in order to get together, meet for lunch, tea, coffee etc. was absolutely silent. No big deal, I thought that simply nobody was in the mood. The problem is that I've noticed that all of them are still doing those things together, just without me. This leads me to believe they created the exact copy of this chat room, with the exact same people participating, excluding me. What further convinced me of this is the fact that today not only did they go to lunch together, they also specifically, by name, asked everybody else in the room, since not everybody is using this chat, whether they want to come, excluding me. The situation seems surreal to me, as firstly it was not my intention to upset anyone, and secondly I find it really hard to believe that killing somebody's fictional character can lead to such behavior, especially since they can roll back the entire campaign if they want to. My guess is that they are trying to punish me for doing what I did, however I find it childish. My question is, what would be the best way to repair my work relations with my colleagues after such incident?
However, I find it childish. All parties involved here are acting like children. From their point of view, you deliberately ruined what was or should have been a long-running game on a whim, and you evidently failed to even apologize for doing so. Your colleagues are also behaving somewhat inappropriately if they are indeed freezing you out of all social interaction, as the professional thing is to treat colleagues professionally and amicably, even if you don't like or actively dislike them. But at the same time they aren't required to include you in their social circle or friend group, and you can't demand that they do. So that being said, you screwed up, you really screwed up, and the reason you're being ostracized is almost certainly the fact that you don't recognize that you screwed up and haven't apologized for doing so. That's a big problem. While I'd rather not get into the details of your actions in the context of the game, as the question David linked is that, well, it's easy enough to summarize. You were invited to join a cooperative game that's been in progress for at least 10 hours and in which the players, your colleagues, were heavily invested both emotionally and time-wise, and then you destroyed it. Alan, several of them probably hate you for it. And why wouldn't they? You stabbed them in the back, perhaps even literally, from the first moment where they really included you in the group, and since you've only been with the company for a few months, that's really all they know of you. So in their minds you are at best not a very nice person. For the same reason that you need to be on your best and most productive behavior during your first months at a company, the same goes for how you treat your colleagues. And pissing people off is not a great way to do so. So what you do now is apologize profusely. How you do so is up to you, but the points you want to hit is that you got too caught up in your character and regret ruining the game for them. Say that you shouldn't have pulled a stunt like that in a new gaming group without discussing it in the group. You'll probably want to acknowledge that it took you a while to realize that you were out of line. Hopefully that will be enough to get them to talk to you again and you can begin repairing the relationships at work. I certainly don't believe that you've ruined any chance of getting along with your colleagues. With some time you can probably even ask to rejoin their leisure activities as long as you make it clear that you won't be repeating this incident. To be entirely clear, I'm coming at you strongly here because you failed to recognize that this was a big deal to your colleagues, and an honest mea culpa is what you need to show that you regret how things turned out and that you now realize that this wasn't a great move. But as I mentioned, both parties share blame here. The correct response from the group or the DM, the person running the game, would have been to either stop you or, as you mentioned, roll the storyline back to before you turned traitor. In both cases you'd have had a conversation on how the group that you just joined runs its games and what is and isn't okay. The same page tool was mentioned in the comments and is one way of approaching this. If you follow that link you'll find that it's listed under the Group Dynamics tag, and that concept is just as important at work. You need to remember when you're socializing with colleagues, even in very informal settings, that there will always be a professional boundary that you need to be aware of, and that the consequences for crossing it can be higher than they would be among friends or acquaintances.
This is known in the gaming community as chaotic evil stupid. It's not an uncommon mistake for beginning players, but it always has the effect of getting them kicked out of the gaming group in a hurry, usually with a lot of hurt feelings. Getting your own character killed in an entertaining manner may be an exception. Players have spent a lot of time and effort developing these characters. You committed an unjustified act of vandalism. This is basic gaming etiquette. You made it worse by dropping that turd in a room full of people much less likely to forgive you, and whom you need to continue to work with. As others have said, all you can do is make clear that you now understand just how rude your action was. The preceding paragraph is not exaggerating, and plead that you were a clueless newbie, playing for the first time, and got caught up in the concept of roleplay without considering that this is, first and foremost, a cooperative storytelling game. If you can convince them of that, this may blow over. If not, well, folks will put it in perspective eventually, but your judgment, at least regarding social situations, but possibly generally, may be considered questionable for some time. For more advice, ask on a role-playing game forum. This isn't specific to the workplace.
A lot of answers have focused on the game, but I think that's the least important part. Where you really dropped the ball is here. At this point I noticed while some of my friends were shocked, surprised by the situation, but still having fun, the rest was clearly disgusted, as what just happened meant creating new characters, starting new story, etc. When you are at a social event, any social event, and you notice that the people you are with are reacting with genuine disgust to what you're doing, there is a problem. A very big problem. The moment you notice that attitude towards you, you have to stop whatever you're doing and ask these people, "I'm sorry, I seem to have done something wrong. What did I do?" And then, at the very least, apologize for what you did and ask how to continue from here. If you had done this, most likely the response would have been, "This kind of behavior is not acceptable in our games," at which point you could have maybe rolled it back, or at least come up with a solution. And the night would have ended fine. But you ignored their negative feelings. Those people most likely left what should have been a fun and relaxed evening event feeling very poorly. You still seem to be unsure of what you did wrong, so probably you have not apologized to them despite this being days ago. So for the past few days, these people may have been feeling bad about something you did, and you never even acknowledged that you caused them grief. Even though you knew, and perhaps they are even aware that you know. It is likely that your failure to acknowledge that you did something bad and ruined their fun weighs much heavier than any characters you killed. Like you said, the story can be rolled back, the characters can be restored. But the negative experience of you ruining their night of fun and games and then not acknowledging it or apologizing for it will not fade so easily. What's going through their heads now is probably not, "Anon killed my elf wizard," it's, "Anon ruined my evening and he doesn't even care that he ruined it." As for what you should do now, apologize to them. Apologize for ruining the game for them. Apologize for ruining their fun during game night. And apologize for not realizing it was bothering them at that time.
The situation seems surreal to me as firstly it was not my intention to upset anyone, and secondly I find it really hard to believe that killing somebody's fictional character can lead to such behavior, especially since they can roll back the entire campaign if they want to. My guess is that they are trying to punish me for doing what I did, however I find it childish. You have proven to be a bad sport and ruined everyone's fun for your own gain. Why would they continue to be your buddies and hang out with you? It probably was a good group before you came up and right now it is again. It's not a punishment. It's the logical consequence of what you did. My question is, what would be the best way to repair my work relations with my colleagues after such incident? The best way would be to understand what you did wrong and apologize for it. Explain that it will never happen again and mean it. I think the first part is very important. I don't get the impression that you fully understand what you did. It's not about fictional characters or rolling dice. It's about ruining other, real, people's fun on their free evening.
At Lilienthal has a very good answer, but I thought I'd contribute a slightly different perspective to the issue. Some of the other answers are starting to iterate towards this realization, but I think they are still often obscuring the main point. The issue doesn't have anything specifically to do with the RPG, and I say this both as a mod on RPG, SE and a tech manager. It could have been socially inappropriate behavior in any kind of pastime. The group could have gone out to a happy hour and you got drunk and hostile. They could have been playing a soccer game for 2 hours, and at the end you deliberately scored an own goal and shrieked, "Woot!" at them. You behaved in a way that makes them concerned about whether you are trustworthy or not. If this were just a friend group, this would actually be less of a big deal. But when playing with coworkers, there is an additional layer of dynamic you seem to be unaware of. The work doesn't ever completely go away. You are continuously interpreted on 2 levels, the social level and the work level. This can be difficult, which is why some people don't socialize with coworkers and why dating is forbidden at some workplaces. So their concerns about your trustworthiness go beyond the D&D game. They slop over into work, where you definitely want people you work with to be reliable and not backstabbing. They now have the very real concern, if things were to go bad and there were to be layoffs or something, this guy seems like the kind of person who would roll over on someone else to keep his job, get a promotion, etc., or act unprofessional at an unexpected time. You have, to them, revealed a pretty bad character flaw that they are concerned about being active in the rest of your interactions. In the RPG world, there's different playstyles and it's not objectively wrong to play CE characters and player kill and all that, but in the real world, it's definitely wrong for you to be the first person to go there, especially when you're new. Just like you probably don't want to be the first person to whip off your pants at the company Christmas party by doing that either thing. You've raised a big red flag that says, "Poor judgment shown here." You've shown poor social judgment, both from deviating from their norms and especially for not apologizing and not understanding what you did wrong. And no one wants to spend their fun time with poor judgment guy, or work with him on a project, or rely on him to peer review your code, etc. Unless they are also poor judgment guys, in which case your workplace begins to resemble an episode of Workaholics. What to do? Apologizing is good, but that won't build back the trust. You need to do that yourself by not acting like a freak, both in pure work context and in social context with them. Be kind, reliable, and show good judgment consistently after your apology and they'll accept you again. You have to make them able to write it off as a one-time thing instead of the way that guy is. Is this fair? That's a childish question that doesn't matter in the real world. People judge others on early impressions and like to think they can intuit a lot about their personality and likely end in life based on notable interactions with them. Given what you did, the others are all thinking their own variations of this. I hope he doesn't come in and shoot up the office. One is only half joking to another right now. Is that a ridiculous extension of something that happened in an elf game? Maybe. But that's the situation you're in. As you work yourself out of this situation, I hope it's a learning experience for future work, social interactions. Unless your workplace is a biker gang, being the first one to break social norms is not a desirable trait. You don't have to stop if you perceive that as the man keeping you down. You can get away with it if you are a very charismatic and or b you learn how to read the room better.
Games have both written and unwritten rules. Each time a group of people play a game, they end up agreeing on unwritten and often unspoken rules and assumptions about the game. Some games of D&D involve backstabbing and inter-party conflict and chaotic stupid characters. Others don't. You appear to have violated the unwritten rules of the game you were in. The fact that this came as a surprise and you think you did nothing wrong means you may not be aware that strong unwritten rules underlie many kinds of group recreation. To the other players, you were someone new to a group activity who, in the first time they showed up, gleefully violated the unwritten rules of the group activity and did not demonstrate any remorse for doing so. To you, this was just something you did, in the game. To the others, this could reflect an inability to pick up on unwritten rules and follow them to maximize the enjoyment of everyone in a social group. They appear to have responded by avoiding you in the short term. You seem to have only picked up on this response many days later, which is further evidence to them that you are not picking up on non-explicit social signals. Interacting with someone who doesn't pick up on non-explicit social signals is extremely tiring and often not fun. So at this point, you are being treated as someone who they shouldn't share their group social events with, because they cannot trust you not to break them. They have reasonable and growing evidence that you are a risk, and little evidence to the contrary. Building social groups is work, and damaging them is easy. How can you fix this? The first thing you can do is actually realize what you did wasn't good. You entered into a new social dynamic and proceeded to break it. You may not have intended to, but you didn't act with care in this new social dynamic. When you enter a new social activity with a group, you should act relatively passively and learn what the rules of this group is. You shouldn't proceed to do something you haven't seen anyone else do, especially if it could be considered aggressive or harmful in any context. First, internalize your error. Look over your life, and see other situations where, through no fault of your own, the same thing happened. Now that you understand that, go and apologize. Don't use these complex words. Talk concretely about what you did, and apologize for what you did in that game. State it wasn't appropriate. Don't justify your action with anything as complex as this answer. That looks like excusing yourself. State you were a real idiot, individually to each person, in a context where they aren't trapped or cornered and forced to interact with you. Do this without grandstanding. After you have apologized, see if things thaw. After a day or so, take initiative and ask some of them to do something social via the old chat channel. The problem isn't what you did by itself. The problem is what you did in the social context that you did it.
Apologize immediately. Try to convince them that you understood what you did and why it was wrong, leaving the game mechanics issue aside. That is better addressed on other SE sites. The result of your actions is that you came out like an unsportive and unfriendly person who ruined their fun on purpose. Engaging in out-of-work activities with your colleagues may be fun, but you have to be sure that everyone is actually enjoying it. Bad mood and feelings generated outside the workplace will surely spill in. The fact that you consider the causes or their reactions childish doesn't mean your coworkers do too. If they reacted by isolating and ignoring you, it means that from their point of view you did a very mean thing. You need to act immediately before their behavior becomes permanent. As an aside on D&D specifically, you joined the campaign and created your character in about an hour. Their characters were alive for a few more sessions, so about 1 month, maybe more. You don't exactly know how much time they spend refining their build and reading manuals, or working on their background, but maybe the characters you killed had a book's worth of backstory and were planned to last for years, realizing their creators' dreams, and becoming epic and powerful. Surely if you killed one of my characters as the new guy, and just for the sake of it, I would not take it kindly and I would probably react the same way, if not worse.